Yes, this is major history, and I'm doing this as a way of a follow up report on the selection of Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota to be the prospective vice president candidate on the ticket of Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, and her quest to become first female president of the United States. And there is precedent for such a breakthrough on a local level here in Philadelphia. We elected the first woman, the first African American woman to hold the office of mayor of Philadelphia in the 300 odd year history of the city of Philadelphia. So it would not be unwise to speculate that there may be a breakthrough on the horizon, as it was several years ago with the election of Barack Obama. However, getting back to the subject of her selection of Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, traditionally, the selection of a vice president during a campaign generates a lot of excitement, enthusiasm amongst the rank and file, and followed closely by the media initially. But history shows us that once the candidate assumes office, the vice president basically fades into the background. And actually, sometimes even before the candidate assumes office of the president, more often than not, the vice president is relegated to a supporting role. The majority of attention focused on the top of the ticket. And I basically feel this campaign of Harris and Walz will be no different. Usually the vice president causes not much of a controversial stir unless he steps out of his role. Candidates have chosen good vice presidents and sometimes not so great vice presidents. Richard Milhous Nixon chose in his first term Mr. Spiro Agnew, governor of Maryland, was turned out to be an exceedingly bad choice. Controversy followed him wherever he go. He got into inner sparring matches with the causing great embarrassment to the administration of Nixon, and ultimately he was forced to resign, caught up in a scandal while he was governor of Maryland. Probably to the great relief of President Nixon, he chose subsequently Gerald Ford for his second campaign for office. And normally, except in emergency situations, unforeseen situations, through the stepping down of from the campaign of President Biden in '68, when President Johnson announced he was not running for another term in office. Only these type of situations where a vice president assumes a greater posture in the American political landscape. As in the case when FDR in his fourth term passed away, not unexpectedly, and his vice president, Harry S. Truman, assumed the office of the presidency. And as I said before, sometimes the selection of a vice president can be fortuitous or quite adverse, depending on the choice. Vice President Truman assumed office, underrated president, actually was quite successful upon assuming office of the presidency. It made many accomplishments and achievements during his term. On the other side, Abraham Lincoln's choice of Andrew Johnson as vice president turned out to be a rather adverse choice. His term was marked by controversy, scandal, and reverse the march toward equality for African Americans. His term in office was nothing short of disastrous, and actually he was the first president to be render articles of impeachment during his rule. So only time will tell whether Vice President Harris' choice was a wise one or beneficial one, and we'll yet to discover this if and when she's elected. Thank you. Yes, this is major history, and in the news headlines for the past week or so has been Ukraine's bold maneuver attacking Russia in their own territory, taking the military forces of Russia apparently by surprise. And the outcome or goals of which are yet to be seen or to materialize. But history teaches this type of tactic or maneuver has been used with varying degrees of success in different parts of the globe and different phases in history. The 1973 war, the Israeli army crossed over Suez Canal, grabbing territory and attacking Egyptians on their own territory as a maneuver to offset the Egyptian advance in the Sinai Peninsula. Apparently, this was a negotiation tactic to force the Egyptians to negotiate and to undertake a mutual withdrawal from both their forces to the original lines. The Germans in 1944 attacked the Allies in the Ardennes area of Belgium, creating a bulge in the Allied lines, also taking the Americans by surprise. Although this maneuver did not succeed in its goals, apparently it sees Allied held ports on the coast of the Belgian coastline, mainly Antwerp. It did disrupt their offensive plans temporarily. So there are other examples as well. In the Korean War in 1950, General Douglas MacArthur attacked the North Koreans in the north, forcing them to withdraw their forces, and from the south, a very successful operation. Also during the Punic Wars, Second Punic War, or rather the Second or Third Punic War, the Romans attacked Carthage in their own home territory, forcing the Carthaginian armies to withdraw to their home territory, where they ultimately faced defeat at the hands of the Romans. So this maneuver is a tried and true military tactic used without history. and but it remains to be seen who will be successful in this regard, because the opposing forces are rather unequal, and then it remains to be seen whether Ukrainians can have the offensive capability to maintain their operations in their enemy's home territory for a prolonged period of time. And it remains to be seen what type of forces the Russians will use to counter this offensive by the Ukrainians. Thanks. Yes, this is a major history, and I have to title this podcast "The Last Kicks of a Dying Horse." As you might be aware, the son of Robert Kennedy, uh, Robert Kennedy Jr., is currently running a campaign for the presidency of the United States, I believe as independent. At one point in his campaign a few months ago, he was polling a rather astonishing 15% in the polls. But recently his poll numbers has dropped drastically. He's hovering around 4.5%, 5% in most of these polls. And actually, his poll numbers began to drop after President Biden announced he was not going to seek the nomination of the Democratic Party to be his presidential candidate. And not long after that, RFK poll numbers began to drop drastically to the point where it is now. And when Kamala Harris became the nominee for the Democratic Party. So you might wonder why RFK Jr. is pursuing his campaign at all with such a low percentage numbers. Well, there's several truisms in American politics that while a third-party candidate can't win, he may be able to cause a mainstream candidate to lose. Potentially, that may have happened in the campaign of Al Gore against George W. Bush in their hotly contested and controversial campaign. Most analysts, with good reason, believe that Ralph Nader's campaign took away potential voters from Al Gore, allowing George Bush to win that campaign. So really there's no logical, rational, reasonable reason for him to continue this other than to take away voters from either candidate, allowing the other candidate to win. and this may be the case with RFK Jr. And actually, most of the analysts say that his campaign has a potential to take votes away from both candidates, but actually more so from Donald Trump's campaign, because he leans toward somewhat radical right-wing ideology, a COVID denier, vaccine denier, amongst other things. So only thing I can see is RFK campaign is the final last kicks of a dying horse, and before he finally reached the end of his rope, the end of the line, last gasp. Thank you. Yes, major history coming to you again after a brief hiatus with some new material I would like to discuss. Tentatively, the candidates for the President of the United States, Republican and Democrat, Donald J. Trump and Kamala Harris, have agreed to a debate next month. And if this goes off, it has the potential to be a pivotal event in contemporary American politics. We've seen through historical events that debates can change political atmosphere and change the course of contemporary political environment. We saw that recently with the untimely and ill-advised debate between President Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which would produce a really disastrous outcome for President Biden. We've seen examining history that debates have potential to be very fortuitous and advantageous to the winner. Back in the 19th century, before the Civil War, one of the most significant debates were between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, both contending for the office of Senator of the United States. In a series of 7 debates, Abraham Lincoln introduced himself to the national public in a presidential fashion and proved himself an able, adroit, and convincing debater. These series of debates and successfully cementing his support for his candidacy for President of the United States, which he successfully won several years later debates which took place in 1957-58. So we see that in historical terms, debates have given very significant impact on the voting public. And this may well be the case with the upcoming debate between Donald J. Trump and Kamala Harris, and could have a significant impact in swaying undecided voters in a very tight race, which is this has potential to be. And undecided voters may have a significant impact on the outcome of the election in November. So this debate, which will be closely watched by many in this country and abroad, could be one of the most pivotal and significant events in contemporary political history, on par with the Lincoln-Douglas debates of the 1850s. Another significant pivotal event in American history. The Great Debate 2024. And we'll all be watching for the potential outcome of that debate. Thank you. Yes, major history. And this is like a follow-up to my previous podcast, The Great Debate. And I touched on the importance of televised debates and historical perspective of one of the most important and pivotal debates. To my knowledge, the first televised debate was between John F. Kennedy, presidential candidate in 1960, and Richard Milhous Nixon, the vice president under administration of Dwight D. Eisenhower. They had a series of debates, 4, I believe, in total. And it was a consequence of these debates. It seemed that the perception trumped reality. Most analysts believe that Richard Nixon was better, debater, had more of his facts straight. But overall, he may have lost out to Kennedy because Kennedy seemed more vibrant, energetic, telegenic, or photogenic, whereas Nixon appeared, for whatever reason, tired, perspired frequently, seemed haggard, and seemed much older than he was. And these televised debates had wide impact on the voting public. By 1960, most American households did have televisions. And John Kennedy's performance was seen to be more magnetic, more appealing than Richard Nixon's performance. And many political pundits and analysts believe these debates were very important in swaying the election, which Kennedy won by a very narrow margin, one of the closest, if not the closest, elections in American history. And some believe that that election was won or lost through those televised debates between the candidates in that particular election. So since then, televised debates between candidates, presidential candidates since the 1970s has been pretty much standard. And they tend to be widely watched and carefully rehearsed. By the way, even though Nixon lost the election of 1960, he learned from it apparently, reinvented himself, and even though he's subsequently lost another election in California, local election, he pursued politics, changed his strategy, became more media savvy, as the book called The Making of the President, 1968 outlines. Nixon staged probably one of the greatest political comebacks in American history, coming re-elected President of the United States in the 1968 campaign. And is through the use, his salesmanship, the marketing techniques that he employed helped greatly into winning the office of the presidency in the election of 1968. So actually debates can be important, influential, and have long-reaching and important consequences for the prospective candidates in offices in both locally and nationally. It might have the same effect potentially in the coming debates between Kamala Harris and Donald J. Trump. And of course, we'll be watching that and monitor that debate quite closely. Thank you.